So we're going back on stage again. We're going to be live in the Cork Opera House on March 30th for a very special event, which is going to form part of the Cork Podcast Festival. Our show is called Look Who's Talking. It's going to be all about those criminals. How do we get them into studio? How do we get up close and personal with them? And what have they got to say when the cameras are off? So Cork Opera House, tickets from corkpodcastfestival.ie, 30th of March. See you there.
So, Sarah, thank you very much for joining us. We obviously did a podcast about this case involving the really tragic death of your brother, and focusing on Kieran Fogarty, who was, we were talking about him in terms of being a dangerous gangland criminal, which he is and was. But we didn't really know as much about Joe, and sometimes the victims can be forgotten about. You know, and Joe, of course, was a final year journalism student, and we get a lot of students in through this building where we work with the Sunday World and the Independent work here. A lot of Joe's age. And so could you just tell us a bit about his personality? Because the tributes have been really glowing and heartfelt towards him. How would you describe Joe yourself?
Oh, Joe was just an amazingly kind-hearted, boy. He was my brother, but he was my best friend first. We talked on the phone every day. We talked to each other all the time, and he was always there to offer support and just the person I turned to for everything. He was so funny. He was hilarious, and he always had a way of just bringing tough days lighter. And he was just amazing. He was so incredibly hardworking, and yeah, he was just so dedicated to everything he pursued, and he was so determined, to help people through his work in journalism. And he was just, he was amazing. He was an advocate for people, really, and an advocate for just people's rights. And yeah, he had such a keen sense of justice himself, and which is ironic how things ended up. But he was just an amazing boy, and he was my best friend. So
yeah, and he was a boy, or a really young man, but he'd also kind of maybe come into his own. Had he in college life, that had really been a time when he was kind of flourishing? Would that be fair to say?
Oh yeah, for sure. When he went to Limerick, he just really came out of himself. He was so determined, to, I don't know, he was just so determined. When he went down to Limerick, he just changed. From a boy to a man then. And then he went to Berlin for a few months to do Erasmus. And when he came home, God, he was so determined then. And he was just an amazing person. But yeah, he really flourished when he went to college. And he loved Limerick, which is funny. He was meant to stay at home in Laois for his final year. And he ended up saying to me, Sarah, look, I have to go back down to Limerick because, the countryside wasn't for him. And he just wanted to be a city boy, and he was just so determined in everything he did. And college really, he just flourished there.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a marked contrast, I suppose, to Kieran Fogarty, who was of a similar age, but his life had been marked with acts of violence, acts of criminality, ignoring of the law, but also, bringing direct harm to other people, or at least putting them in harm's way. Sarah, you've obviously, we had big news just recently in the DPP agreeing to appeal the sentence, and that's come on the back of your family really running a very high-profile campaign. Can you speak just a bit about, why you felt compelled to really go public, which must have been really, really tough on you all?
Yeah, well, when we heard the sentence on the 30th of January, we were just outraged. That day in court, and the judge had even had went through the differences between Joe and Fogarty, and had said Joe was making such a good impact in the world because he was, and then had went on to state all these things that Kieran Fogarty was doing, he was embroiled in a life of crime, he had said. And then he went on to the sentencing for what he did to my brother, and he handed him 6.5 years for that. But then he moved on to a gun charge that he had, and he gave him 8 years. And in the courtroom, the judge had said this would be served consecutively, but it wasn't until the end when our barrister clarified the charges that then the judge said, he meant to say concurrently. So when we heard that it was meant to be concurrently, we were just outraged. There was no word to describe it. It felt like a a punch in the stomach, really. You know, it kind of felt like the justice system completely forgot about Joe and our loss and the loss that we've suffered. And yeah, it was just no justice. There was no accountability for what Kieran Fogarty did to my brother. And we were just outraged. And then to find out then the only thing we could do was try and get the DPP to appeal. So we were trying our best then for that. And thankfully they did appeal the case. But yeah, now we're just campaigning to try and get the legislation changed and the law changed, that concurrent sentences can't happen when a death has been involved, because it's just, you know, like it has to be consecutive, you know, to hold criminals to real accountability and, you know, give the victims and their families, you know, the justice that they deserve. So yeah, we started an online petition now on change.org to try and change legislation, because we can't have another family going through what we went through and the injustice that we suffered there. So
exactly. Now, Sarah, just to, I suppose, give it a really basic level, like and most people would know it, but a concurrent sentence would be where if somebody is given a number of years for one crime and they get a second sentence for another crime, that they're served basically at the same time. So if you get 2 years for something and then 2 years for something else, you really serve 2 years in prison. A consecutive sentence would be whether each sentence is placed on top of each other. You know, it's now obviously Kieran Fogarty. When we did the last podcast, you know, his crime, besides Joe, he was on bail when he killed Joe. He was already on bail for very serious offences. He obviously Joe he well, tell us, I suppose, what happened on the day and how Joe lost his life, really, in such a for Joe just to be waiting on a bus and for this to be inflicted on him.
Yeah. So Joe had just finished like his job. He was working at a local restaurant, and he went up to the bus stop and was waiting for a bus. And that's when Kieran Fogarty, a known criminal to the guards, had 46 previous convictions, and, you know, he was banned off the roads. He drove at a speed of 122 kilometers per hour. He broke a red light and he hit another car and then drove straight into Joe and killed him. Yeah, and he spent 14 seconds in the car, then wiping down his DNA and fled the scene. And I don't think he was caught until 10 days after, when the guards found him then. But yeah, it was awful. Like, I remember that night I was waiting for Joe to finish up and work. He was meant to call me, and then the guards had came to the door to tell me that Joseph Drennan had been killed in a road collision. And like, geez, you just don't forget that ever. Like I had just been talking to Joe. I just texted him, and it was awful. You just don't forget that.
No. Yeah. And obviously, I mean, people dying in road traffic accidents, absolutely tragic and terrible, terrible losses for the family, no matter what the circumstances. But the circumstances with Kieran Fogarty weren't normal. He'd had some sort of interaction with the Gardaí, as they speak, earlier that day, hadn't he? So he was, he was obviously people. Tragedies can happen if people lose attention or whatever, but he was obviously off his head on drugs and drink. He was also, as you said, on bail, banned from driving despite his young age. He was also facing charges in relation to shooting at a house on Hyde Road. And Hyde Road has been an area of where there's been, I suppose, what we describe as a kind of a gangland feud that goes on. And Kieran Fogarty had played a role in this. He was a young man, but despite being a young man, he had access to an automatic, semi-automatic pistol, had fired at a house where women and children were there. He was ultimately convicted of drugs charges of a serious nature. So this is a person that is out of control by any standard, a person that even before Joe's death had shown a disregard for human life. What were the circumstances in which the judge I suppose, mitigated the maximum sentence he might have received? Or did he give those reasons? Like,
I think the reasons was because, well, of his age and because he had admitted his guilt. Which I mean, it was kind of hard to take that because he only admitted his guilt after the third set of interviews, and after he was shown all the evidence that was against him. So he knew he wasn't going to get away with it, whether he brought it to trial. So I think, that was kind of hard as well to see that, like, he got 3.5 years off for admitting guilt, even though he had never intended to admit it. It's just when he only admitted it after he found out, that he wasn't going to get away with it. And it was really hard to take that because, I mean, that night Kieran Fogarty did absolutely everything wrong. Like, he never, obviously he was on his foot, like, he was, making a mockery of the guards, laughing at the guards on his phone. He had videoed them, and he obviously did everything wrong. He hit Joe, he ran a red light, he was driving without insurance or a license, and he was banned off the roads. But, like, then he left Joe as well to die. And he fled the scene. He tried to get all his DNA gone and, hid out in a house for 10 days. So, when I seen that he got 6.5 years for that, I just kind of thought, God, there was nothing actually more he could have done, like, wrong. So that was very hard to take as well. But
I mean, there are other circumstances in which people offer an early plea. I mean, we do hear it, and you will hear it yourself from reading the newspapers or whatever, that you'll hear people who like, something happens and they'll go into a police station and say, I did this, a moment of madness or whatever, and then they still deserve to be prosecuted and see justice. But it always does strike me as really funny unusual that people get this credit for a guilty plea when they've been given a book of evidence, DNA and everything just means it's 100% inevitable that they're going to be found guilty. Did you feel any remorse from him, or?
No, I didn't. Like, obviously we had went to the courts, to the trials and stuff, and we had seen him, and there was just, no remorse. The letter his solicitor, his barrister read out was just felt like a tick the box thing for him to do, and there was no actual meaning behind it. And to be honest, anyway, we didn't even want to hear it, because if he was sorry and if it was an actual accident, he would have done something different that night, but he didn't. No, he didn't.
So, Sarah, presumably you had no experience of going to courts and before all of this tragedy. I mean, how does it feel to be a family member of somebody going through that system? Do you feel that family members are supported, or are they considered in the right way? I mean, a lot of people often think that they're really forgotten about, and you just start hearing more and more of the defendants' sort of stories, I suppose. Yeah,
for sure. Like, I mean, like, I actually only found out recently that a victim impact statement it's only a relatively new thing to have happened in court. Like, I can't believe that, really. I read out the victim impact statement for my family, and but it was, I can't actually believe that, that really in the court system, you do kind of feel forgotten about. Like, I don't know, like, it was all, I don't know, you just kind of feel like, especially with the sentence that was given, you just kind of feel like Joe was forgotten about, and the loss that we've suffered was forgotten about by just having handed a concurrent sentence. Like, the judge seemed to have more leniency for a known criminal than he did have justice for my brother or justice for us, and that is kind of hard to take. You're meant to believe in the justice system, and the justice system failed us and failed Joe.
Well, and the justice system, I think, has failed you in this circumstance, but the community seems to have really given you maybe the opposite feeling, is it, of support, because people have really got behind the campaign and really come out, in obviously online in the petition, but also in person as well at protests you've held.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, we had there was one organised in Limerick City, and a lot of people came to that. That was on Thursday last week, and then We had one in our hometown, Mount Tarath, and I think over nearly like 1,500 people had arrived. And yeah, the community has just really showed amazing support. We're holding another one on Sunday in Camross. And yeah, just people, people are as outraged as we are. We're reading comments and stuff, and people just can't believe the sentence that was handed, and how unfair it was for Joe and for us. And so yeah, and on the online petition, we have over, I think we have nearly 12,000 signatures on it, and that was only started like a week ago or so. And yeah, people are just really showing their support, and we're thankful for that, because we can't let another family go through this. So that's why we need to try and change the law. And yeah, but the community has been great, thankfully.
So the law that you're really seeking to change is around the consecutive sentencing, and saying that in the circumstances where somebody has lost their lives, that's not appropriate, that will be brought in. Have you spoken to any politicians, or have any of them, maybe thought about taking it on board?
Yeah, well, our local representatives in Laois have spoken, and they're willing to help us with it, because they can see the pain and the outrage that the community has shown, as well as us. So they're willing to help. We were actually up at the Dáil meeting members of Sinn Féin, and they were pretty willing to help as well. So hopefully, yeah, we do get this changed, and we all come together, because we can't let another family go through the same injustice of a concurrent sentence when they're lost.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's it is a strain, isn't it, for you and your parents have had to, I suppose, be public and all of that. That must be a hard thing to have to do, especially after the trauma of the case.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's awful having to advocate for justice. I mean, grief. You're dealing with grief all the time. You miss Joe so much, and you think about him all the time. And then you have trials and sentences on top of it. And then after, when justice is meant to be served, it wasn't served. Now you have to advocate for justice. And thankfully, we did get the appeal. But now, it's hard. You have to try to advocate for change now. You don't want to see. I don't want to see another sister going into a courtroom and feel like their brother or a family member was forgotten about. So we really just need. It's hard trying to have to advocate for change, and no family should have to do that. But that's just where we are. We don't want to see another family go through this, or anybody. So yeah, we're just trying to work our best now that this will be changed.
And so just, Sarah, the DPP, they will appeal the leniency. They don't appeal the DPP's appeal will be based on the totality of the sentence, I suppose, rather than the specifics of that. You don't have a time frame for that. It's going to be a period of time anyway, isn't it? A year.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, Sarah, what are, if people want to sign the petition, or where would they find it, and what is it called, I suppose, basically?
Yeah, well, if you just go onto change.org and type in Joe Drennan, it'll come up. It's a petition, just to change the current sentencing laws on concurrent sentences. So, change.org. If you type in Joe Drennan, you'll see it. But yeah, that's it.
That's it, Sarah. Thanks very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
Just one of those things that just the contrast of their lives, but also the fact that we have loads of students of Joe's age coming in and out of this building, and yeah, it really struck home. So thank you very much, Sarah, and we'll try and keep on this case and keep bringing this up on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
A Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel.
and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.